The rain hammered against the airport terminal windows as Sarah Martinez stood in line at security, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She had just returned from a 3-week hiking trip in the mountains, her skin still tanned from days under the sun, her muscles pleasantly sore from the trails. The airport buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers rushing to catch flights, families reuniting, and the endless announcements echoing through the corridors. Sarah placed her belongings in the gray plastic bins, removing her jacket and shoes like everyone else. She was tired, ready to get home to her small apartment in San Diego, take a long shower, and sleep in her own bed. The security officer, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, waved her through the metal detector. She stepped through without incident, collecting her things on the other side. But as she reached for her backpack, 2 uniformed security personnel approached her quickly. One was a woman with sharp eyes and pulled-back hair. The other, a tall man with broad shoulders and an expression that meant business. "We need you to come with us," the woman said, her voice low but firm. Sarah blinked in confusion.
"What?"
"I just went through security. Everything's fine." "Just come with us, please," the man added, his hand moving toward her elbow. A cold feeling settled in Sarah's stomach. She looked around, noticing how other travelers were starting to stare. Her mind raced through possibilities. Had she accidentally packed something wrong? Was there some kind of mistake with her identification? She hadn't done anything wrong. That much she knew for certain. "Can you tell me what this is about?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We'll discuss it in the security office," the woman replied, gesturing toward a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Sarah had no choice but to follow. Her heart pounded as they led her through the door and down a narrow hallway. The sounds of the busy airport faded behind them, replaced by the harsh fluorescent lighting and the echo of their footsteps on the tile floor. They entered a small room with white walls, a metal table, and a few chairs. It looked like something out of a police interrogation show. "Sit down," the male officer instructed. Sarah sat, her hands trembling slightly. "Please, can someone tell me what's going on?" "I haven't done anything wrong." The female officer crossed her arms. "We received a report about suspicious markings on your person. We need to verify your identity and the nature of those markings." "Suspicious markings?" Sarah's confusion deepened. Then it hit her. The tattoo. Her hand instinctively moved to her left shoulder, where beneath her t-shirt lay a detailed military insignia she'd had for 5 years. "My tattoo?" she asked. "Is this about my tattoo?" "We need to see it," the man said flatly. Sarah felt a surge of indignation mixed with embarrassment. "It's just a tattoo. It's personal." "I don't understand why this is such a big deal, ma'am. Certain military symbols are protected and restricted. If you're displaying unauthorized military insignia, that's a serious matter. We need to verify whether you have the right to bear that marking." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She understood now. Someone had seen her tattoo when she'd adjusted her shirt or stretched during the security line, and they'd reported it. The insignia on her shoulder wasn't just any design. It was specific, detailed, and yes, it carried weight in certain circles. "I'm not taking off my shirt in here," Sarah said firmly, her initial fear giving way to frustration. "Then we'll need to detain you until we can verify your credentials," the female officer responded. "Or you can cooperate now and make this easier for everyone." Sarah's mind whirled. She thought about the tattoo, about why she had it, about what it represented. It wasn't just ink on skin. It was a reminder, a memorial, a connection to a part of her life that had shaped everything she'd become. But explaining that to these security officers who were just doing their job, who had probably seen people trying to fake military service or steal valor 100 times before, seemed impossible in this moment. Before she could respond, the male officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "We're going to need you to stand up and turn around." "What? You're arresting me?" Sarah's voice rose in disbelief. "We're detaining you pending verification. Standard procedure when there's suspicion of stolen valor or unauthorized use of military symbols." Sarah stood slowly, her legs feeling weak. This couldn't be happening. She just wanted to come home from a vacation. She just wanted a normal day. Now she was being treated like a criminal because of a tattoo that meant everything to her. The cold metal of the handcuffs closed around her wrists with a sharp click. The sensation was humiliating, degrading. She'd never been in trouble with the law, never even gotten a speeding ticket. And now she stood in a small airport security room, restrained like someone dangerous. "This is insane," she muttered. "I'm not a criminal. I'm not pretending to be anything. I'm not." "That's what we need to determine," the female officer said. Though her tone had softened slightly, perhaps sensing Sarah's genuine distress, they made her sit again. Her hands cuffed behind her, which made the chair uncomfortable and awkward. The male officer left the room, presumably to make calls or check records. The female officer remained, standing near the door, watching Sarah with an expression that was hard to read. Minutes passed like hours. Sarah's mind kept replaying the moment the cuffs had closed around her wrists. She thought about her phone, which they'd taken along with her belongings. She thought about her family, her friends, the people who knew her story. If they could see her now, they would be outraged on her behalf. The tattoo on her shoulder seemed to burn beneath her shirt, as if it knew it was the cause of this situation. But it wasn't the tattoo's fault. It was the world's misunderstanding, the assumptions people made. The way appearances could be deceiving in both directions. The door opened, and the male officer returned. He was followed by two more people, both wearing different uniforms, higher ranking based on their bearing and the insignia they wore. Sarah's heart sank further. This was escalating, not resolving. "Miss Martinez," one of the newcomers said, a woman with graying hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. "I'm Officer Chen. Can you tell us about the tattoo on your left shoulder?" Sarah took a deep breath. "It's a memorial," she said quietly. "It's personal." "Memorial to what exactly?" "To someone I served with," Sarah replied, the words catching slightly in her throat. Officer Chen's expression shifted just slightly. "You served?" "No," Sarah said, and she saw the immediate change in the room's atmosphere. The way suspicion flooded back into their faces. "Not officially, but I was there." "You were where?" Sarah closed her eyes briefly. This was the part that was always hard to explain. The part where people either understood or they didn't, and there was rarely middle ground. She opened her eyes and met Officer Chen's gaze directly. "I was a civilian contractor, embedded with a special operations unit overseas. For 18 months, the tattoo commemorates someone who didn't make it home." The room went very quiet. Officer Chen exchanged a glance with her colleague, then looked back at Sarah. "Which unit?" Sarah told them, speaking the designation that had been her whole world for those 18 months. She saw recognition flicker across Officer Chen's face, followed by something else, something that might have been respect or might have been doubt. It was hard to tell. "Civilian contractors don't typically get unit tattoos," the other newcomer said, a man with a stern jaw and crossed arms. "This wasn't typical," Sarah replied. Nothing about that deployment was typical. She could see them processing this, trying to decide if she was telling the truth or spinning an elaborate story. The problem with the truth, Sarah had learned, was that sometimes it sounded less believable than a lie. Real life didn't always follow the scripts people expected. "We're going to need to verify this," Officer Chen said finally. "Do you have documentation?" "Deployment records. Anything that proves what you're saying?" "At home," Sarah said. "Not with me. I just came back from a hiking trip. I wasn't expecting to need to prove my background to get through airport security." The words came out more sharply than she intended, but she was past the point of being polite. Her wrists hurt from the cuffs, her shoulders ached from the awkward position, and the indignity of the whole situation had worn through her patience. Officer Chen's phone rang. She answered it, stepping aside and speaking in low tones Sarah couldn't hear. The conversation lasted less than a minute. When she hung up, her expression had changed again, this time to something Sarah couldn't quite identify. "There's someone here who wants to speak with you," Officer Chen said. "He's been informed of the situation." "Who?" Sarah asked, confused. "You'll see in a moment." The door opened again, and this time, everyone in the room straightened reflexively. The man who entered wasn't tall, but he carried himself with undeniable authority. His uniform was crisp, decorated with ribbons and insignia that spoke of decades of service and high rank. His hair was silver at the temples, his face lined with experience, and his eyes were the kind that missed nothing. Sarah recognized rank when she saw it. Even if she couldn't immediately place all the specific details, this was someone important. Someone whose presence in a small airport security room was unusual enough to mean something significant was happening. The Admiral, because that's clearly what he was based on the reaction of everyone else in the room, looked directly at Sarah. His gaze moved from her face to her shoulder, though the tattoo was still hidden beneath her shirt. Then he looked at the handcuffs restraining her wrists behind her back. His jaw tightened. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute command. The kind of voice that had ordered ships and troops and operations that most people would never know about. Set her free. The words hung in the air, simple and undeniable. Officer Chen moved immediately toward Sarah, producing a key for the handcuffs. The metal bands released with a click that sounded impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Asterisk. Sarah rubbed her wrists where the handcuffs had left red marks on her skin. The relief was immediate and physical, but confusion still clouded her mind. She looked at the Admiral, this stranger who had walked into a tense situation and changed everything with 3 words. Who was he? How did he know about her? And why did his presence carry such weight that trained security officers had obeyed him without question? The Admiral's eyes remained fixed on Sarah, studying her with an intensity that felt both uncomfortable and somehow reassuring. There was recognition in his gaze, not of her specifically, but of something she represented. When he finally spoke again, his voice had softened from command to something more personal. "Miss Martinez," he said, "would you show me your shoulder?" It wasn't an order, despite his rank and bearing. It was a request, asked with a respect that the security officers hadn't shown. Sarah hesitated only briefly before pulling down the collar of her t-shirt, revealing the intricate tattoo that had caused all this trouble. The design covered most of her left shoulder, rendered in black and gray with remarkable detail. At its center was a military insignia, specific and unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. Around it, integrated into the design like a frame, were coordinates, a date, and a name. The artistry was exceptional, the symbolism deep, and to the right person. It told a complete story without a single word being spoken. The Admiral stepped closer, his eyes tracing the lines of the tattoo. Sarah watched his expression change as he took in the details, the coordinates, the date, the name. Something flickered across his face that looked like pain, quickly controlled but undeniably there. He reached out as if to touch the tattoo, then stopped himself, his hand falling back to his side. Jason Chen, he read the name aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Lieutenant Jason Chen. Sarah's throat tightened. Hearing the name spoken by this stranger in this strange room after all these years hit her harder than she'd expected. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak just yet. The Admiral looked up from the tattoo to Sarah's eyes. "You knew him." It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. "Yes, sir. I knew him. Tell me how." Again, not an order. An invitation. Sarah pulled her shirt back into place and took a moment to gather her thoughts. The other people in the room had gone completely still, sensing that whatever was happening here went beyond airport security protocols and stolen valor checks. This was something else entirely, something personal and profound. "I was a translator," Sarah began, her voice steadier than she felt. "Arabic and Pashto, fluent in both. After college, I was recruited by a defense contractor to work with special operations units overseas. They needed someone who could handle sensitive negotiations, translate during intelligence-gathering operations, and communicate with local populations in regions where trust was hard to come by." She paused, the memories flooding back with a vividness that 5 years hadn't dimmed. The heat, the dust, the constant tension of living in a war zone, the bonds formed between people who depended on each other for survival. I was assigned to Lieutenant Chen's unit for an 18-month deployment. At first, they didn't want me there. A civilian, a woman, young and inexperienced in their world. But Lieutenant Chen gave me a chance. He said if I could keep up and do the job, I'd earn my place. So I did. The Admiral listened without interrupting, his full attention on her words. Sarah could see understanding in his eyes, the recognition of a familiar story. How many times had he heard similar tales? How many deployments? How many units? How many people who'd served together and formed bonds that civilians could never quite understand? Lieutenant Chen was one of the best officers I've ever encountered, Sarah continued, and she meant it. Fair, intelligent, brave without being reckless. He treated me like a member of the team, not just a contractor who happened to be there. When things got dangerous, which was often, he made sure I was protected but also trusted me to do my job. He taught me how to handle myself in combat situations, how to think tactically, how to stay calm when everything around you was chaos. Officer Chen, who'd been standing quietly by the door, shifted slightly. Sarah noticed and realized the shared last name might not be a coincidence, but she kept going with her story. We ran a lot of operations together over those 18 months. Raids, intelligence gathering, working with local village elders, training missions with allied forces. I translated yes, but I became more than that. I was part of the team. They called me Shadow because I was always there, moving with them, quiet but necessary. It wasn't an official designation, just a nickname that stuck. Sarah's hands had unconsciously moved to her shoulder again, touching the place where the tattoo lay beneath her shirt. The memories were so vivid now, playing like a film in her mind. The faces of the men she'd served with, the sound of helicopters and gunfire, the smell of desert air and burning fuel, the feeling of being part of something larger than herself.
There was this village,
she said, her voice dropping lower. In a remote valley, intelligence suggested it was being used as a supply route for insurgents. Our mission was to confirm the intelligence, gather information, and if possible, turn some of the local leaders into informants. It was supposed to be a routine operation. We'd done dozens like it. The Admiral's expression darkened slightly. He knew, as anyone with military experience would know, that the phrase supposed to be routine almost always preceded tragedy. We arrived at dawn, Sarah continued. The village looked quiet, normal. Lieutenant Chen was cautious, as always. He insisted on proper reconnaissance before we went in. But the intelligence we had was time-sensitive. Command was pushing us to move faster, and we did. She closed her eyes briefly, seeing it all again. The narrow streets between mud-brick buildings, the early morning light casting long shadows, the tense alertness of the team as they moved through the village. And then, the moment everything changed. It was an ambush. They'd been waiting for us, knew we were coming. The firefight erupted from multiple directions simultaneously. We were pinned down, outnumbered, taking casualties. Lieutenant Chen organized a fighting retreat, making sure everyone had cover, calling in air support, coordinating our extraction under fire. Sarah's voice had gone flat, the way it always did when she talked about that day. It was the only way she could get through the telling without breaking down. The emotions were still there, buried deep, but contained behind the wall of matter-of-fact recitation. I was with a small group including Lieutenant Chen, trying to reach an extraction point. We were almost there when we realized one of our guys had gone down about 50 meters back, wounded and exposed. Lieutenant Chen didn't hesitate. He went back for him, under heavy fire, completely exposed. I watched him reach the wounded soldier, start dragging him toward cover. And then, she trailed off, unable to say the words. She didn't need to. The Admiral's expression said he understood. Officer Chen, by the door, had tears in her eyes. A rocket-propelled grenade, Sarah finally said. Direct hit on their position. Both men were killed instantly. We managed to recover their bodies during the extraction, but there was nothing we could do. Lieutenant Chen died saving someone else, which is exactly how he would have wanted to go if he had to die at all. The room remained silent for a long moment. The initial reason for Sarah being detained seemed absurdly distant now, irrelevant in the face of the story she'd just told. This wasn't about stolen valor or unauthorized tattoos. This was about honor, sacrifice, and the bonds formed in the crucible of war. The Admiral cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "That tattoo," he said, gesturing toward Sarah's shoulder. "That particular insignia is restricted. It's reserved for members of that specific unit who have earned it through service and sacrifice. Civilians don't get it, contractors don't get it, and certainly people who try to fake military service don't get it." Sarah nodded slowly. "I know that, sir. I knew it when I got the tattoo. But Lieutenant Chun's team gave it to me before I left after the deployment ended. They said I'd earned it, that I was one of them regardless of my official status. They took me to a tattoo artist they trusted, and the whole team was there when I got it done. It was their way of saying I'd always be part of the unit, always be remembered as someone who served with them." The Admiral's expression softened even further. "They broke protocol doing that, sir." "They did. And you've carried that tattoo, that mark of their respect and recognition, ever since." "Yes, sir." "Every day." The Admiral turned to the security officers who had detained Sarah. His voice returned to its tone of command. Not harsh, simply authoritative, leaving no room for argument. "That tattoo is legitimate. Miss Martinez earned the right to wear it through service alongside one of our finest units under combat conditions. The fact that she wasn't technically military doesn't change the validity of her service or the appropriateness of that marking. Is that understood?" Everyone in the room nodded, even those who outranked the security officers. When an admiral speaks, people listen. The male security officer who'd handcuffed Sarah looked genuinely apologetic now. Understanding dawning on his face about what had really happened here, Officer Chen stepped forward. Her composure regained, though her eyes were still bright with unshed tears. "Sir, if I may ask, how did you know? How did you happen to be here at exactly the right moment?" The Admiral's lips quirked in something that might have been a smile. "I was scheduled to fly out of this airport this afternoon. I happened to be in the terminal when your alert went out about a possible stolen valor case involving that specific unit insignia. That unit was under my command at the time of the incident Miss Martinez described." Lieutenant Jason Chen reported directly to me, turned back to Sarah, and this time the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. "Jason was like a son to me. I recommended him for that position, trained him personally, watched him grow into an exceptional officer. When he died, it nearly broke me. I attended his funeral, spoke at his memorial, and carried the guilt of sending him into that valley for years afterward." Sarah felt tears pricking her own eyes now. She'd never met this man before, but they shared a connection through Jason Chen. Through loss and memory, and the weight of survivor's guilt that never quite went away. "The coordinates on your tattoo," the Admiral continued, "are the exact location where he died. The date is accurate, and the way the insignia is rendered, with those specific details that only someone who actually served with that unit would know, tells me everything I need to know about the legitimacy of your marking. That tattoo wasn't made by someone trying to steal valor. It was made by someone trying to preserve memory and honor sacrifice." The atmosphere in the small security room had completely transformed. What had been an interrogation space filled with suspicion and tension now felt almost sacred. A place where shared grief and respect had created an unexpected bond between strangers. Sarah wiped at her eyes, not caring any more about appearing vulnerable in front of these people who had detained her. The truth was out now, and with it came a release of emotions. She'd kept carefully controlled for years. The Admiral reached into his jacket and pulled out a handkerchief, offering it to Sarah with a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that felt appropriate to the moment. She took it gratefully, dabbing at her eyes and taking a deep breath to steady herself. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say, "for being here, for understanding." The Admiral nodded slowly. "I should be thanking you, Miss Martinez. Civilians who embed with combat units face dangers they're not trained for, make sacrifices that go largely unrecognized, and live with memories that civilians back home can never understand. You've served with honor, and Jason clearly recognized that. The fact that his team gave you that tattoo tells me everything. I need to know about the kind of person you are and the kind of service you provided." Officer Chen, who'd been standing quietly throughout the conversation, finally spoke up. Her voice was thick with emotion. "Lieutenant Jason Chen was my brother. The words fell into the room like a stone into still water, sending ripples of understanding through everyone present. Sarah's head snapped up, looking at Officer Chen with new eyes. The resemblance was there now that she was looking for it. Something in the shape of the eyes, the set of the jaw, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity. "Your brother," Sarah repeated softly. "I didn't know he had a sister in airport security." Officer Chen managed a small, sad smile. "I transferred here 3 years ago, after I left active duty myself. Jason was my older brother by 5 years. He was my hero growing up, my role model, the person I most wanted to be like. When he died, I thought I knew everything about his last deployment, about the people he served with, about what happened that day. But I never knew there was a civilian translator who'd been with his unit. Someone he'd trusted and respected enough that his team would give her the unit tattoo." She moved closer to Sarah. Her earlier authority replaced by something more personal, more vulnerable. "Can I see it again?" "The tattoo, please?" Sarah nodded and once again pulled down her shirt collar to reveal the intricate design on her shoulder. Officer Chen studied it with the intensity of someone looking at a piece of their own history, their own family story rendered in ink and skin. Her fingers traced the air above the tattoo, without actually touching it, following the lines of the insignia. The coordinates, the date, and finally, lingering over her brother's name. "He always talked about earning the respect of his team," Officer Chen said quietly. "About building trust, about making sure everyone under his command knew they were valued and protected. He wrote to me about the importance of looking out for everyone. It's not just the soldiers, but also the support staff, the translators, the locals who helped them. I never realized how literally he took that responsibility until now." Sarah felt a lump forming in her throat again. "Your brother was an incredible officer and an even better man. He made me feel like I mattered, like my contributions were important. In those situations, when you're the only woman, the only civilian, sometimes young and uncertain, it's easy to feel like an outsider. But Jason never let me feel that way. He challenged me, yes, pushed me to be better, but he also had my back completely. I trusted him with my life, literally, and he never let me down until the day circumstances took him away from all of us." Officer Chen's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they fell freely down her cheeks. "My parents died not knowing the full extent of what he accomplished, how many lives he touched, how many people he protected. They passed away within a year of losing Jason, both of them. Grief just consumed them. I'm the only one left now who carries his memory. And hearing these stories, meeting someone who knew him in that environment, it means more than you could possibly know." The Admiral placed a gentle hand on Officer Chen's shoulder, a gesture of comfort from someone who understood loss and grief in ways most people never would. "Your brother would be proud of you," he said simply, "both for your own service and for how you've carried on his legacy." He turned to address everyone in the room, his voice taking on the formal tone of someone making an official statement. "What happened here today should serve as a reminder that service takes many forms, and sacrifice isn't limited to those who wear the uniform. Miss Martinez served her country in a combat zone, faced enemy fire, and lost someone she cared about while carrying out her duties. The fact that she was a civilian contractor doesn't diminish any of that, and it certainly doesn't give anyone the right to treat her like a criminal for honoring that service and that loss."
"Oh."
The male security officer who'd originally detained Sarah stepped forward, looking genuinely remorseful. "Miss Martinez, I owe you an apology. I was following protocol, yes, but I should have given you more of a chance to explain before resorting to restraints. I've seen too many cases of stolen valor, too many people trying to claim service and benefits they didn't earn, and I let that experience make me cynical. I'm sorry." Sarah appreciated the apology, though part of her still felt the sting of humiliation from being handcuffed. "I understand you were doing your job," she said, trying to be gracious. "Stolen valor is a real problem, and people like me, with complicated service histories that don't fit neat categories, we're going to trigger alarms sometimes. I just wish there was a better system for verifying these things without immediately treating people like criminals." The Admiral nodded thoughtfully. "That's a fair point, and one worth addressing at higher levels. The reality is that modern conflicts create situations that don't fit traditional military structures. Contractors, embedded civilians, local allies. All of these people serve alongside uniformed personnel, but often fall through the cracks when it comes to recognition and documentation. It's something that needs to change. Officer Chen had composed herself somewhat, though her eyes remained red. She looked at Sarah with an expression that mixed grief, gratitude, and something else, something that looked like hope. Would you be willing to talk more about my brother? About your time with his unit? I have so many questions, so many things I'd like to know about that part of his life. The official reports only tell part of the story, and the other team members who survived, they've been hard to track down, moved on with their lives. Scattered across the country? Sarah didn't hesitate. Of course, I'd be honored to share those memories with you. Your brother deserves to be remembered, and not just as a name on a memorial wall or a line in an official report. He was a real person, funny and serious, tough and compassionate, flawed and extraordinary. I have stories I've never told anyone because civilians don't understand. And other veterans, well, they have their own stories, and sometimes don't want to hear about other people's wars. But you'd understand, and you have a right to know. The two women exchanged phone numbers, making plans to meet for coffee once Sarah had time to recover from her trip and this unexpectedly draining encounter. The simple act of planning a future conversation felt almost mundane after the emotional intensity of the past hour. But it was also grounding, a return to normalcy and forward motion. The Admiral glanced at his watch, a practical gesture that signaled the unofficial part of this encounter was coming to an end. Miss Martinez, I need to catch my flight, and I'm sure you're eager to get home. But before I go, I want you to know something. That tattoo you wear isn't just a memorial to one man or one mission. It's a symbol of a kind of service that often goes unrecognized and unrewarded. You earned it through actions, not paperwork. Through loyalty, not rank. And anyone who questions its legitimacy from this point forward will have to answer to me personally. He pulled out a business card from his wallet and handed it to Sarah. It was simple. Just a name, rank, and contact information. But the weight of what it represented was significant. If you ever face another situation like this, if anyone ever questions your right to wear that tattoo or tries to accuse you of stolen valor, you give them this card and tell them to call me. I'll set them straight. Sarah took the card with hands that trembled slightly, overwhelmed by the unexpected turn this terrible day had taken. I don't know what to say, sir. Thank you doesn't seem adequate. Don't say anything, the Admiral replied with a slight smile. Just keep living your life with the same courage and integrity you showed during that deployment. That's the best way to honor those we've lost. He turned to Officer Chen and the other security personnel. I trust this matter is completely resolved. Miss Martinez is free to go with apologies for the inconvenience and misunderstanding. I'll be filing a report about this incident, not as a criticism of anyone here, but as a recommendation for protocol improvements when dealing with civilians who've served in combat zones. Everyone nodded their understanding and agreement. The tension that had defined the first part of this encounter had completely dissipated, replaced by a somber respect and mutual understanding. Sarah gathered her belongings, which had been returned to her, and prepared to finally leave the small room that had become an unexpected site of connection and revelation. Officer Chen walked with her toward the door. I meant what I said about wanting to talk more. Please don't think it was just something I said in the moment. I really do want to know about Jason, about his life during that deployment, about the person he was when he wasn't writing carefully edited letters home to his worried family.
Oh.
Sarah squeezed the other woman's hand. I promise we'll talk. I have photos too, on my external hard drive at home. Candid shots from the compound, from downtime between missions, from cultural exchanges with local village leaders. Your brother in moments when he was relaxed, joking around with the team. Being human, instead of always being the officer in charge. I'd be happy to share them with you. The thought of those photos made Officer Chen's eyes brighten, despite the tears. I'd love that. We have so few pictures of him from that time, just the official ones. And those never capture who someone really is. They exchanged a brief hug. Two women bound together by shared grief for a man neither could bring back, but both could keep alive through memory and story. Then Sarah stepped out of the security room and back into the normal flow of the airport, where travelers hurried past, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded in the hidden spaces behind the public facade. The Admiral had already disappeared, probably heading toward his own gate with the efficiency of someone accustomed to tight schedules and important duties. But his intervention had changed everything. It transformed what could have been a humiliating and potentially legal nightmare into something else entirely. Something that felt almost like closure, or at least like a new chapter in an ongoing story of loss and memory. Sarah made her way through the airport terminal in a daze, her mind still processing everything that had happened. The ordinary sounds of the airport, announcements over the PA system, rolling luggage, chattering families, all seemed distant and surreal after the intensity of the past hour. She found herself touching her shoulder repeatedly, feeling the tattoo beneath her shirt, as if confirming it was still there, still real, still hers. By the time she reached the rideshare pickup area outside the terminal, the adrenaline that had been keeping her upright began to fade. She felt exhausted, emotionally wrung out, and desperately in need of the normalcy of her own apartment. The driver who picked her up tried to make small talk about her trip, but Sarah's distracted responses eventually led to a comfortable silence for the remainder of the drive. Home had never looked so welcoming. Sarah's apartment was small but tidy. A one-bedroom space she'd carefully decorated to feel like a sanctuary from the outside world. Photos lined one wall, a mix of family, friends, and yes, a few carefully chosen images from her time overseas. She dropped her backpack by the door and headed straight for the bathroom. Finally taking that long-awaited shower she'd been dreaming about since getting off the plane, under the hot water, Sarah let herself cry properly for the first time since the detention had begun. The tears mixed with the shower spray, washing away the stress and fear and humiliation of being handcuffed, but also releasing deeper emotions she'd kept carefully controlled. Memories of Jason Chen flooded through her mind, not just of the day he died, but of all the days before that. His laugh, his terrible jokes, the way he'd insisted on teaching her how to properly clean and maintain a weapon, even though that wasn't technically part of her job. The pride in his eyes when she'd successfully negotiated with a difficult village elder. The times he'd checked in on her when she was struggling with homesickness or fear or the weight of living in a war zone. After the shower, wrapped in comfortable clothes and holding a cup of tea, Sarah sat on her couch and stared at the business card the Admiral had given her. She'd placed it carefully on her coffee table. This small piece of cardboard that represented so much: validation, protection, recognition. She picked it up and examined it more closely, noticing the Admiral's full name and title, the official military contact information, the simple elegance of the design. On impulse, she took a photo of the card and sent it to 3 of her old team members. The men who'd been with her during that deployment and had survived. They'd stayed in touch sporadically over the years, checking in on anniversaries of difficult dates, sending brief messages to confirm they were all still alive and coping. The group text she sent was simple: "Had an interesting day. Long story. This Admiral came to my defense. Did you guys know him?" The responses came quickly, as they often did when she reached out. The team might be scattered across the country now, living separate civilian lives, but that bond remained strong. The first reply came from Danny, who'd been a sergeant and was now working as a high school history teacher in Ohio. "Holy crap, yes, we know him. He was our operational commander. One of the best." What happened? Sarah typed out a brief summary of the airport incident, the detention, the Admiral's intervention. As she sent each message, more responses flooded in from the group. Marcus, now a contractor in Dubai, sent a string of angry emojis followed by, "They handcuffed you? For the tattoo we all agreed you earned? That's insane." The third member of their small group chat, Tony, who'd left the military to become a paramedic in Texas, was more philosophical. "I'm not surprised someone finally questioned it. We knew it might happen someday. But I'm glad the Admiral was there. He always understood things other people didn't. Remember how he came to Jason's memorial and talked to each of us individually? He gets it. Sarah did remember. The Admiral had attended the memorial service held at the base. And afterward, he'd spent hours talking with team members, asking about Jason, sharing his own memories, listening to their grief and their stories. At the time, Sarah had been too overwhelmed to really process the significance of a flag officer taking that much personal time to honor a fallen lieutenant and comfort his team. Now, years later, she understood better what that gesture had meant. The conversation with her old team members continued for another hour, drifting from the airport incident to updates about their current lives, to shared memories of the deployment, to the ongoing challenge of processing trauma and loss while trying to build normal civilian existences. It was a familiar pattern, this checking in and reconnecting. And it always left Sarah feeling less alone in carrying memories that most people in her current life couldn't understand or relate to. As evening fell, Sarah made herself a simple dinner and settled in to finally relax after the long day. But her mind kept returning to Officer Chen, to the sister of the man whose name was permanently inked into her skin. What would it be like to sit down with her, to share stories and photos, to talk about Jason not as a fallen hero in the abstract, but as a real person with quirks and flaws and humanity? Part of Sarah felt nervous about it, worried about saying the wrong thing or disappointing a grieving sister's expectations. But another part felt a sense of rightness about the connection, as if this meeting had been meant to happen all along. Over the next few days, Sarah and Officer Chen, whose first name she learned was Michelle, exchanged several text messages. They made plans to meet for coffee the following weekend at a quiet cafe Sarah knew in downtown San Diego. Michelle mentioned that she'd requested the time off work specifically for their meeting, emphasizing how important this was to her. Sarah felt the weight of that importance, the responsibility of being a keeper of memories about someone Michelle had loved and lost. When the day of their meeting arrived, Sarah spent extra time choosing what to wear. She finally settled on a simple blouse that made the tattoo on her shoulder easily visible without being obvious. She gathered the photos she'd promised, loading them onto a tablet so they could look through them together. Among the images were shots of the entire team during downtime. Jason playing cards with other soldiers, a group photo taken after a successful mission, candid moments that captured the humanity beneath the military roles. The cafe was cozy and not too crowded, with comfortable chairs and soft lighting that created an atmosphere conducive to serious conversation. Sarah arrived a few minutes early and claimed a corner table that offered some privacy. When Michelle walked in, Sarah recognized her immediately, despite the fact that she was in civilian clothes now, rather than her security uniform. Michelle looked nervous but determined, carrying a small photo album of her own. They hugged briefly, that slightly awkward embrace of people who'd shared an intense experience but were still essentially strangers. Then they sat down, ordered coffee, and for a moment just looked at each other, both uncertain how to begin a conversation about loss and memory and a person who connected them but could never be present again. Michelle spoke first. "I've been thinking about what to say all week. I have so many questions, but I don't want to overwhelm you or make this hard. I need to know more about who my brother was during that time. The letters he sent home were always edited, always careful not to worry our parents. And after he died, I tried to find people who'd served with him, but it was difficult. Most of them had moved on, didn't want to talk about it, or were dealing with their own trauma. You're the first person who's been willing to really share those memories." Sarah nodded, understanding. "It's hard to talk about. Not because of you or your questions, but because remembering is painful. That deployment changed me in ways I'm still processing years later. But Jason deserves to be remembered fully, and you deserve to know your brother as he really was." She opened her tablet and pulled up the first photo, a group shot of the entire team in front of their compound. Jason was in the center, tall and confident, his arm around one of the younger soldiers in a gesture that was both protective and brotherly. Sarah pointed him out, then identified each other person in the photo, explaining their roles and personalities. "This was taken about 3 months into the deployment," Sarah explained. "We'd just successfully completed a major operation and morale was high. Your brother was actually a terrible photographer, which is why he's in this one instead of behind the camera. He always cut off people's heads or got his finger in the frame." Michelle laughed, a sound that mixed joy and sorrow. "That's so Jason. He was terrible at taking pictures at family events, too. We used to tease him about it all the time." We went through the photos slowly, Sarah providing context and stories for each one. There was Jason teaching local children how to play soccer using a ball the team had brought from the base. Jason in full gear, looking serious and focused before a mission. Jason laughing at something off camera, his face creased with genuine amusement. Jason sitting with Sarah and 2 other team members, all of them exhausted after a long operation, drinking coffee and looking grateful to be alive. "He talked about you?" "You know," Michelle said suddenly, pointing to a photo where Sarah was visible in the background. "In his letters, I mean. He never mentioned you by name for security reasons, I guess. But he wrote about our translator who was smart and brave and kept the team connected with the local population. He said you'd earned everyone's respect, that you were more than just a contractor doing a job. I never imagined I'd actually meet you someday." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest at those words. To know that Jason had recognized her contributions, had valued them enough to mention them in letters home, meant everything. "He made it possible for me to succeed," she said quietly. "A lot of officers would have treated a civilian translator as just a tool to be used. But Jason understood that I was part of the team, that my effectiveness depended on feeling integrated and valued. He went out of his way to include me in briefings, to explain the tactical situation so I'd understand the context of what I was translating, to make sure I had proper protective gear and training. He probably saved my life multiple times just by insisting I'd be properly prepared." Michelle pulled out her own photo album, opening it to show pictures of Jason as a child, as a teenager, in his dress uniform at various military ceremonies. "This is who I knew," she said. "My big brother who let me tag along even when his friends said sisters were annoying, who taught me how to throw a baseball properly and how to stand up to bullies at school, who called me from boot camp even though he wasn't supposed to, just to make sure I was okay. When he died, I felt like part of my own identity died with him. He was my role model, my protector, my hero. And then he was just gone, and I was left with these photos and memories in an aching absence that never goes away." Sarah reached across the table and took Michelle's hand. "He wouldn't have wanted you to be consumed by grief. From what I knew of him, he'd want you to live fully, to find joy, to honor his memory by being the best version of yourself. That's what he always pushed all of us to do, to be better than we thought we could be." They talked for hours, the coffee growing cold and being replaced with fresh cups multiple times. Sarah shared stories of Jason's leadership style, his sense of humor, his moments of doubt, and his triumphs. Michelle shared memories of their childhood, family traditions, the dreams Jason had expressed before joining the military. Together, they created a more complete picture of who Jason Chen had been. Not just the officer or the brother, the full human being who'd been both and more. As the afternoon stretched into evening, their conversation turned to the day of Jason's death. Michelle had read the official reports, of course, but Sarah could provide details those reports had left out. The moments leading up to the ambush, the split-second decisions made under fire. The horrible clarity of watching Jason run back into danger to save another soldier. The devastation the team had felt at losing him. "He didn't suffer," Sarah said, knowing this was important for Michelle to hear. "The explosion was instantaneous. There was no pain, no fear, no prolonged agony. And he died doing exactly what he believed in, protecting his people, never leaving anyone behind. If there's any comfort to be found in his death, it's that it was consistent with how he lived, with the values he held most dear." Michelle wiped tears from her eyes with a napkin, nodding slowly. "Thank you for telling me that. The official reports are so clinical, so stripped of humanity. Hearing it from someone who was there, who knew him personally, it makes the loss feel more real, but also somehow more bearable. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Sarah assured her. "That's why I got the tattoo, why his team gave it to me. We needed a way to carry the memory that felt real and permanent, that acknowledged the truth of what happened without sanitizing it or romanticizing it. Jason was real, his death was real, Our grief was real, and the tattoo captures all of that in a way words never could. As they finally prepared to leave the cafe, Michelle gave Sarah a tight hug. This meant everything to me. I can't thank you enough for being willing to share these memories, for keeping Jason alive in your heart all these years, for honoring him with that tattoo, even though you knew it might cause problems. You're exactly the kind of person he would have wanted to serve with, exactly the kind of friend he deserved. Sarah hugged her back, feeling tears on her own cheeks. We'll do this again whenever you want. You're not just Jason's sister now. You're my connection to that part of my life. My reminder that those experiences and that person continue to matter. Let's stay in touch. They exchanged promises to meet regularly, to continue sharing memories and supporting each other through the ongoing process of grief and healing. As Sarah walked back to her car, she felt lighter somehow, as if sharing the burden of memory had made it less heavy. The tattoo on her shoulder, which had caused so much trouble just days before, now felt more meaningful than ever. It wasn't just a memorial anymore. It was a bridge between past and present, between loss and healing, between the person she'd been during that deployment and the person she was becoming years later. When she got home, Sarah found a message waiting from the Admiral. It was brief and formal, but the kindness behind it was clear. Miss Martinez, I wanted to follow up after our encounter at the airport. I've submitted recommendations to improve protocols for verifying the service of civilians who've deployed with military units. Your experience should not be repeated. I also wanted you to know that I've been in touch with other members of Lieutenant Chen's unit, and they all speak highly of you and confirm everything you told me. Your service and sacrifice are recognized and appreciated. With respect and gratitude for your dedication to our country and to the memory of a fine officer. Sarah read the message several times, each time feeling a renewed sense of validation and gratitude. The journey from detention and handcuffs to this moment of recognition and respect had been unexpected and emotionally exhausting, but it had also brought unexpected gifts. Connection with Michelle, renewed contact with her old team members, and the knowledge that the tattoo she wore was understood and honored by people who mattered. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, pulling her shirt aside to fully reveal the tattoo. The ink was still sharp and clear, the details still perfect. Lieutenant Jason Chen's name remained prominent, surrounded by the coordinates where he'd fallen. The date that would always mark the worst day of Sarah's deployment, and the unit insignia that represented everything they'd all fought for together. Thank you, Jason, she whispered to the reflection, to the memory. To the man who'd treated her with respect when others hadn't, who'd made her feel valued when she'd felt invisible, who'd died protecting his people just as he'd always promised he would. For everything you taught me, for the example you set, for the person you helped me become, I'll keep carrying your memory forward, and I'll make sure others know who you really were. That's a promise. The tattoo, once a source of pain and conflict, had become something more. It was a reminder of service and sacrifice, yes, but also of the connections that transcend official designations and formal recognition. Sarah had earned it not through paperwork or rank, but through lived experience. Through danger shared, through loyalty proven under fire. And now, thanks to an admiral's intervention and a sister's gratitude, the legitimacy of that tattoo was secured not just in memory, but in the wider world as well. Sarah pulled her shirt back into place and moved forward into her evening, carrying with her the weight of memory and the lightness of validation, ready to continue living a life that honored both the living and the dead, both the person she'd been and the person she was still becoming.